Thinking I have no question.
What are the first memories that you have? What's the first things that you remember?
I can remember being a toddler, probably no more than 16 or 18 months old, walking on what I think was St. Mark's Place on First Avenue in New York City. That I walked down the street, and on the corner there was a little stand where they sold candies for pennies, and it had mirrors around it. And I remember going there and admiring myself in the mirror.
What year were you born?
1918. That had to be about 1919. 1920, I was in. But I was born at the end of 1918.
Where were you born?
Manhattan, New York City, about 2 blocks from where my father was born.
What do you remember New York being like in those days? What were the streets like as you walked away? The streets. I mean, what do you remember New York?
I remember cobblestone on 2nd Avenue in the 14th Street area because we lived on 13th Street and 2nd Avenue. And I remember being frightened when the horse-drawn fire engines used to come by. They used to scare the hell out of me. I was a little kid.
Were there cars at that time? What was the
There were cars. There were a lot of horse and wagons, but there were cars. It was transportation was mostly automobile or trolleys or cabs, but mostly mechanical vehicles.
Not many horses in the streets, or?
Oh yeah, there were horses all over. There was a lot of horse-drawn traffic. Every peddler had a horse. They had horses to sell fruit. They had horses for the ice. They had horses to the laundryman. They had a lot. Like I said, they had the horse-drawn fire engine. And they used to have horse trials. I remember one in front of a park. There was a park between 15th Street and 17th Street on 2nd Avenue. I think the Mount Sinai Hospital is right there. And they used to have a horse trial where they used to stop and the horses used to water up. They also had a little fountain for humans. So the driver and the horse both got rid of their thirst at the same time.
Where did you live? What neighborhood did you live in?
Oh God, I lived all over. I lived on 15th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. I lived on 13th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. I lived on 10th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. I lived on 1st Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. This was all in the period of the 20s, from I guess 1920 to about 1930. In that time, when I was 10, Mom and Pop separated for over a year, and Mom and I went to live with Aunt Rose Jacobson, in the Bronx on 2086 Lyes Avenue. That's where I first met Aunt Tess. She lived across the street, and most of my childhood memories, I mean, at that age, up until 10, were Lower East Side, between 15th Street, 2nd Avenue, all the way down to Houston Street. That was the Broadway of those days. I think around that time, Broadway started to move up to Times Square, but they had many legitimate theaters. They had on one street, they had 3 different movies. They had the Orpheum, which was on St. Mark's and 2nd Avenue, and it's still open. They still have legitimate shows there. That's off-Broadway shows. They had the St. Mark's Theater, which was across the street next to the library. That was on the corner of 2nd Avenue and St. Mark's. And I remember seeing the Thief of Baghdad there with Douglas Fairbanks. I saw the Gold Rush with Charlie Chaplin there. I remember that while you were sitting there, they come around squirting to get rid of the insects in the theater. In the small intermissions they had, you used to go in the back and buy 2 cents worth of candy. It was enough to last you the whole show. Today, 95 cents for a little bag of peanuts. Across the street, on 10th Street and 2nd Avenue, you had the casino theater. And the best part of these theaters is the big billboards up on the side of the building to show you what was playing. They'd have 2, 3, 4 movies at a time. Of course, in those days, the movies used to run about an hour. But I'd spend 8 hours in the theater very, very easily. The price used to be 2 for a nickel. So if you had 3 cents, you were always sure to find a kid with 2 cents. Memories.
Go ahead.
Okay. It had to be 1925. We lived on 13th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. Oh, about 2 brownstone stoops from the corner. And we lived on the first floor in the rear. We had about 3 rooms, but the room you walked into was a kitchen. Next to it was a living room, and we had an upright piano. Piano was a big thing. I never lived in it with my father without having a piano. Wherever we went, there was a piano.
How old were you then? About?
I had to be about 6 or 7, about 6 years old. And that's the place where I remember my father playing pianos with Jack Palmer, who wrote I Found a New Baby and Everybody Loves My Baby. They're standards in the music world. That's where I met Earl Father Hines, because Pop used to sit and teach him how to use his left hand. He was a great piano player by that time, but he didn't know his left-hand rhythm. And my father did. So we used to sit and play piano with him. That time, I guess Pop was about 27, 28 years old. What I remember is that at that age, I was free to go wherever I want. They'd give me a dime and send me to movies. They didn't care if I went to 3 movies. It didn't matter. I used to go to the next corner. On the corner of 13th Street and 2nd Avenue, you had one movie on one side, another movie on the other side, and these were the movies that they had when you see all the pictures of the old Nickelodeon. They had all those pictures on the wall, from the ground up to the top of the roof, plastered with pictures of movie stars. In those days, Walter Miller, Mabel Normand, Charlie Chaplin. I don't even know if I remember Harold Lloyd at that time. I think that might have been before Harold Lloyd. But I remember William Haynes. I remember, the little guy, Harry Langdon. One of the things I remember when I was a little boy, I was coming home one night, and a man stopped me and he asked me if I wanted to make money. I said, sure. And he offered me $50, which was a lot of money to a little kid. He said, come with me, I'll give it to you. And I went with him, and he walked me down to the Bowery, which was, 3rd Avenue was the Bowery. But where I lived on 13th Street, the Bowery began, I think, at 11th Street. He walked me to a place, had to be between 9th and 11th Street, and it was a pharmaceutical supply house. They used to have the colored water bottles out in the window with lights behind it, which was very attractive.
Could it have been Keel's Pharmacy?
Who?
Keel's?
I don't know. I don't remember. I don't remember who it was. But it was I think that pharmaceutical house is still there. I know it was there 10 years ago. It's right at the beginning of the Bowery. And he took me into an alley and opened up this slide. That's all I had to see, even at 6. I ran like a thief. I bet it took me 4 seconds to get from where I was to where I lived. I ran into the house all out of breath. Whether I told my parents or not, I don't remember. But I remember that incident to this day, which is 60 years later. And it shows how quickly a kid can learn what's right and what's wrong. So that's just one of my childhood memories.
As you grew up, what happened? As you got older, I mean, what was school like?
Well, I never went to one school for more than 2 or 3 months because we used to move all the time. We kept moving, whether it was because my father couldn't pay the rent or not, I don't know. I know we owed. At that time, I was so happy to get tenants. They used to give you the first month free all the time. So we lived in a place at least 2 months. But I know that in my lifetime, in my formative years, the years between starting school, elementary school, and up until my my parents finally settled down, I thought, in about 1930. From the period that I started school, like 5 or 6 years before, I had been in at least a dozen schools. How I kept up with my grades was a miracle. I guess they just wanted to get rid of me, so they kept promoting me. That's the only reason I can think.
What was the first job you had?
The first job I had was...
How did you earn money when you were a kid?
What did I do for money?
How did you earn money, yeah, when you were a kid?
Well, my father gave me money all my life. My mother's father gave me money. My father was never saying no if he had a buck in his pocket. When I was about the age of 12, when he had a Morton Hop store on Avenue U in Brooklyn, he was also the neighborhood bootlegger. Hy Barsky's brother Charlie worked for my father. My father didn't make me do it. He had another kid clean up the place because he wanted to give the kid a few bucks that the kid needed. So when Sunday would come around, Charlie would get his $2 or $3 pay, and we wanted to go to steeplechase in Coney Island, where for $50 you could go on 50 rides. You could go on 1,000 rides because when the adults would leave the park with a half-full ticket, they give it to the kids standing by the exit. So the kids would go back again. They go on the same ride 4 or 5 or 10 times if they wanted to scrounge tickets from people. And my father used to give me $1 to go with, and for that dollar I could, my first $50 was to get a nickel car fare, $50 to get to the place, a nickel for a foot-long frankfurter on a roll with sauerkraut and mustard. That was my meal, plus a large schooner of root beer for another nickel, and candy for another 30 cents. I was set for the day. That was a full Sunday. The other days we'd go to the beach. 5 cents car fare for the subway. That was it. How we'd amuse ourselves on the beach at that age.
Who were your friends?
I had friends. I had a lot of friends. Hy Barsky and Charlie were very dear friends of mine at that time. But I also was very friendly with some kids that I went to school with. A boy named William Handel, Bill Handel. He lived on 24th Street in Avenue U. I remember at 12 he was a very, very good violinist. He played the violin beautifully. Unfortunately, Bill unfortunately died at a very young age. He must have been about 35 when he died of a heart attack. He's one of those things. I was friendly with Ruby Arkin. I was friendly with Bernie Fisher. Seymour.
How old were you at this time?
13, 14. We used to have a social club. We used to rent a basement for $4 a month, and we'd find sofas and chairs that people would throw out. We'd bring it down the basement. We had a beautiful large basement. It must have been 25 by 50. And we'd bring our girlfriends down there and have parties regularly. We'd keep quiet because the people lived right upstairs. But that was wonderful. As a matter of fact, I used to run away from home every weekend. My parents didn't know where I was. I used to go to Brooklyn. I lived in Harlem around that time. We moved to Harlem in 1934. At that time, I was 15, 16 years old.
Where in Harlem?
The first place we lived in a furnished apartment on Morningside Avenue and Morningside Drive and 124th Street. We had an apartment there. I remember that place vividly because one weekend, Mom and Pop went away for the weekend. They left me home. I was 15, very capable of taking care of myself, I'm sure. And I had a girlfriend, and I brought her there. And we went in and we got on a sofa. And I gave her the business, and I suddenly heard my father snoring in the next room. We got out of there very fast. To this very day, I don't know whether he was really snoring and he snored to get me out of there. That's one of the very close experiences I had. They didn't go away. They came back again without my knowledge. After that, we lived on number 1 Morningside Drive. That was on the top of Morningside Park, which overlooked which overlooked St. Nicholas Terrace. Number one, St. Nicholas Terrace we lived in. And that was a very, very exclusive apartment. We had a doorman. We had a man inside at the desk who would call you if the company came. We had elevator operator.
How?
And it was black and white, interracial.
How come Pop and Mom couldn't afford a fancy place at that time?
Well, they did. At that time, it was fancy because they had the bar and grill and were making money. The trouble is, the Pop was spending more money than he was making, plus drinking more than he was making.
Did Pop drink a lot? Was he a drinker?
He was a 2-quart a day man.
Holy shit.
Smoked 5 packs of Camels a day. He was blind in his left eye because I don't ever remember my father without a cigarette dangling from the left side and the smoke going up into that eye. Smoked 2 quarts a day, and if you didn't know him well, you didn't know he was drunk. But he was drunk.
Surprising he lasted till 30 or 35 or however.
Yeah, he found him. He lasted till 35.
What did he drink?
Rye. Well, he'd drink anything if he had to, but he drank rye predominantly. Rye he made himself. In 1934, when Prohibition was repealed, he had been a bootlegger for several years, a neighborhood bootlegger when he made his own stuff. Obviously, he had a pretty good reputation because either Three Feathers or Green River Whiskey sent somebody down to offer him a job as a cutter to make their whiskey. But he always wanted to be his own boss. He refused it. He could have made big money because we know what it became. But he was offered that job. He was that good a cutter of whiskey. He could make a full case of whiskey out of 1 pint of bonded scotch or whiskey or rye, whatever it was. He used a 5-gallon jug. We used to do it in a 5-gallon jug up on a table. He mixed the caramel coloring and, of course, the alcohol. We used to get, Hi and I used to go to 86th Street and 16th Avenue to a private house to get the 5-gallon cans of whiskey, which we would carry in the buses in Brooklyn. And the peculiar part is, many years later, I married a girl who lived in a house next door, but I didn't know her then. The name of the guy who sold us the liquor was a man named Vincent. I think it was Vincent Iola or something like that. The hell, I was only 12 or 13 years old. I don't remember that well. But Hi and I used to we used to go on the buses on the trolley car with the 5-gallon cans of alcohol and bring it back to top. In those days, are you running? In those days, he had a mall house store on, the first one was on, between Ocean Avenue and 19th Street, on Avenue U. There was a second store from the corner. All the policemen in the 61st Precinct used to come there to get their whiskey. They used to hang out in the back and drink. As a matter of fact, more than once, stuff had to be brought in by the rum runners, and they bring it in at Plum Beach in Brooklyn, which is now the Belt Parkway is there. But in that day, they didn't have a parkway there. They had the bay come right in. They got a bridge there now. The rum runners used to bring the booze in, and the cops used to put it in the Coney Island Hospital ambulance and carry it to wherever they were bringing it. Some of it used to go to my father, but others, I don't know where it was. But the cop used to hang on the back because the inside of the ambulance was loaded with booze off the boat. Now, to make scotch, I remember very vividly that my father used to get bottles of Old Smuggler. They're supposed to be original. Old Smuggler in those days was a very good scotch, as it is today. But they used to have a wax top. You couldn't open it because it was wax. I remember we used to heat the wax up in a bowl, in a pot. After we put all the Old Smuggler labels on and the top labels over it, and he used to dip it in a pot of wax. And it looked no different from the original. Then, if he had to make up a case, he had the carton with the Old Smuggler printed on it. We'd put it in the carton, I don't know if there were 24. I guess there were 24 pint bottles and 12 quart bottles or fifth bottles. He used to put in a case, put it in a sack, sew the sack up, and then Mom used to put water in the bathtub and dump a pound of salt in it, mix it up, and dump the sack in it, pull it out quickly, right off the boat. Sell that case that cost us maybe I don't know what a bottle of Scotch cost in those days, maybe $4 or $5. We sell a case for anywhere from $50 to $100. But that's how it was done. Did you know that?
I knew about the bootlegging. I didn't know the details.
Hybosky remembers that well, because he used to help us. We used to make Gordon's gin out of a bottle of good gin, or whatever. I don't remember really, but I remember the Gordon gin bottles with the label, and we'd have the big 5-gallon jug up on the kitchen table. Pop would siphon it up into the bottles, we'd close the bottles up, we'd sell these fifth bottles of the same Gordon gin you see today. We had those bottles, and this is in the 30s.
What happened to the bar?
The bar? The bar didn't come till after we got rid of the hop stores. Oh, Pop used to sell wine bricks. In those days, they had bricks of compressed wine. They'd sell these to people, and they'd bring it home, put it in a big jug, container, whatever, and shake it up, and they had wine with water. That was their wine. The wine bricks were very popular in the early 30s. Of course, they also had malt and hops. You would make your own beer, which is the business he was in. He had a malt and hop store. That was, of course, the front for the bootlegger. He was an honest bootlegger, though. Nobody ever got hurt with the stuff he made. He didn't use impure alcohol. And the fact is that before he sold it, he drank a lot of it. So we know that it wasn't bad. We had one guy used to come to our house, a man named Reed. He was an old man. Well, at that time, I thought he was old. He was probably in his early 50s, late 40s. But he was a skinny, very tall, skinny guy with gray hair. And he used to come and knock on the door. Can I have a bottle, please, please? Because he was shaking. So Pop would give him a bottle of rye for $1 or $2, whatever it was. And he'd go downstairs, and he'd swig up the whole thing, throw up his guts, and come back for another one. And that was his life. We had another guy, the guy who taught me how to drive. He worked for a bakery truck. His name was Ernie, and his route used to be Gerritsen Beach. Ernie used to come to us right after finishing his route, and he'd say, give me a bottle of gin. And we'd give him the bottle of gin, and he'd say, well, this is my first today. He'd hold on his arm like that, take a swig, and the hair would stand up on his arm. And I used to get a kick out of it. Ernie took me to work with him. He used to take me to work with him some mornings, and he taught me how to drive in his truck. That's my first driving experience.
What kind of cars were you driving at the beginning?
Pop had he had like a 1928 Chrysler. He had Hupmobiles. He had Willys Overlands. He had a lot of cars. Boy, he was never without a car. He had to have wheels. He wouldn't walk from here to the corner.
Willys Overland, is that old?
Is that old?
Willys Overland? I thought Willys Overland was a relatively new car.
No, that was in the 20s. The 20s are relatively new. It's new. He had one of his best cars was a Hupmobile. He had Hupmobile was a great car, and we used to deliver stuff to Pennsylvania. We used to go to Homedale, Pennsylvania. He made a connection out there with an old friend of his. This friend of his was a cab driver back in the early 20s when I was a little boy. Pop was a cab driver too. He couldn't have been more than 22, 23 himself. And their hangout used to be the Battery, downtown New York, Whitehall Street, where the BMT subway comes up, where the people get off South Ferry from Staten Island. And I remember the cabs. They used to have open fronts. The drivers used to freeze. The really open front cabs with no doors in the front or anything.
You mean
and
the drivers?
He was the driver, yeah. He used to sit in the open cabs. Now, At this time, Pop was working there with a guy named Charlie Neary. Charlie Neary wasn't the driver. He was like the guy that would tell him to go. He was the dispatcher. But what he was really was a head breaker. If any strangers broke into the line, he'd break their necks. He was a strong arm guy who my father told me one time, said to my father, "Jake, get in the car, I want you to drive me someplace." Pop got in the car and he drove him to a place on the Lower Bowery. It was a saloon with the swinging doors. When he got out of the car, he said, "Jake, stay in the car with the motor running. I don't want you to get out of here. I want to be able to get out of here fast." But my father was about 22, 23 years old and very curious. So he went and he peeked in. He walked right behind Charlie. When he got to the swinging doors, he was looking over the door, and he saw Charlie talking to the bartender. And Charlie saying, "Where is Jack? Where is Legs?" I'm not sure how it goes. And the guy says, "Well, he's not here now." He said, "Who can tell me where he is?" They asked him. And there were stairs there, like the old cowboy bars used to be. Stairs, a balcony, and everything. And a guy was coming down the stairs. He said, "What do you want, Neary?" And he said, "I want Legs." He said, "Anything you got for him, you can give to me." He said, "Okay." Boom, boom, boom. He shot him and ran out. Pop ran for the car, got in. They were away from there in a minute. But that's one of the things he saw. Charlie Neary finally wound up in Trenton Prison in Jersey, doing a life term. I remember this because when I was a little older, Pop went there to visit him once. He hadn't seen him in years, and he went to visit him. But Pop, being a bootlegger and all, still kept his nose clean as far as that goes. Legitimate professions are rare. Neighborhood bootlegging was one of them. It was a thing that everybody turned their eyes away from because they all wanted to deal with this man. Prohibition was not popular. And this guy was giving him a service. If they get a good guy, they would give him good stuff. That's what they wanted. And he was the man. He knew a lot of people. As I knew in my 30s, I knew a lot of bad people. People involved with the mafia. I knew the Don. I didn't know